Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking Viju, Ravi, Sham, and the team here for inviting me and giving me this wonderful platform to have a conversation with all of you. I must confess I didn't really prepare that many remarks. I wrote up some notes in the car on the way over. The traffic delay gave me some benefit. I had an hour in the car. So I'm just going to try and touch on a range of things, and then the questions I hope will be relevant in a more direct way. If we start with from banker to finance minister, I must first say that I was an accidental banker. I had no vision of a career, and I did many different things. I often say that in retrospect, almost everything I did before I got this job adds value to the way I do this job, but that's with hindsight. In original, I'm very different from most people. I think most people I've met try to find their way through life to some unknown destination. And in my case, rightly or wrongly, I had this kind of conviction when I was young that I would end up like my father and his father before him and his father before him. And so, since I had some idea of my destination, I tried to find as many kind of byways and lanes and roads less traveled before I thought I would end up at my destination. Now, in retrospect, the odds that anybody can do what I did, which is spend 30 years away, do very many things, and then come back to do this job is, 1 in a million. So, maybe it was a foolhardy conviction, but in many ways it has been the making of my life, because I had the great luxury of doing things for the sake of doing things rather than because I needed to make a living or have a career or make a mark or any of those things. I want to talk a little bit about the pinned tweet because I think that's a good place to start. So I was having a conversation with a friend, and I said, in government you come across so many instances where the wrong thing happens and people are aggrieved or they're unjustly denied, or, it still gets me worked up. And I think that's a very bad trait for a politician because, injustice is all around us, and I should learn to play the odds and be smart. And so I often wonder, why is it that I'm like that? Is it just that I was born a child of privilege, and so I've not had to face that much injustice? And so, because I have empathy and that's my nature, I think then I get aggravated by injustice to others. And the friend said, no, it has nothing to do with that. People can come from all kinds of backgrounds and be indignant when there's injustice and wrong. And that's why, and that's the first time I got it, and I immediately pinned it. It just shows that privilege is not the basis for a lot of things. It is for a lot of other things, but it's not for everything. But I have to start with an anecdote. How many of you have read how Che Guevara got to be finance minister, or even central banker? Do you know? Look this up. It's true. One day they're playing golf. Fidel and Che and everybody, after the revolution has been successful, and they're trying to figure out who should do what. So Fidel asks a question, and Che Guevara says, I am. He says, fine, then you can be finance minister. But the question that he asked was, who is an economist? And Che heard it as, who is a communist? Right? So that's absolutely true. I'm not making it up. He heard it as, who is a communist? And he said, I am. And that's how he got to be finance minister. He knew nothing about finance, right? So in some sense, though it's not that accidental for me, I would say that I'm also a very unlikely finance minister. It's very rare in the DMK, in Tamil Nadu, in India for that matter, that a first-time minister, second-time MLA gets a portfolio like finance. If you look at my own party, our founder, Peraringer Anna, the first time he became chief minister, he retained the finance portfolio. Our long-term leader, Thalaivar Kalaignar, The first 3 times he was chief minister, he kept the finance portfolio. He didn't allocate it to anybody. And only in the last term of his life, he gave it to Perasariyar, who was also one of the founders of the party and the general secretary. So in my party, that's true. That's also true almost all the states that I know of and in India. In fact, I heard secondhand that a former Reserve Bank governor had told another Reserve Bank governor that after the success of Mr. VP Singh, the unwritten rule in Delhi is never give the job to somebody who can get elected on their own, because there's too much power in the hands of one individual. In fact, I asked for the HR and CE portfolio. I didn't ask for the finance portfolio, let alone the human resources portfolio. Mostly those are retained with the chief minister. And so, in some sense, I'm almost as accidental a finance minister as I was a banker. But I just want to give a little bit of history, because I want people to know there's no one path to success. Nothing is permanent. And I'll end on this note as well in a different context. I was directly or indirectly invited to come to public life 6 times. First in 96, then in 06, then in 11, then in 14, and finally in 16. The first 5 times, for whatever reason, it didn't work out. There were many reasons. And really, when I came at the age of 50 in 2016, I had reached that stage in my life when it was now or never in some ways, in the sense that I was 50 years old, I'd had successful careers in different parts of the world, I'd made enough money, I'd seen enough things. And it had been 10 years since my father passed, and I was worried that the coattails may not extend that much further. If I didn't come now, there was no guarantee that I would come back later. And it's a sad fact of life that when you have an electorate of about 2.5 to 3 lakh people, and that's in the south. If you go to the north, an MLA constituency can be 3.5, 4 lakh people. It's very hard for you to get elected without having a brand name. There are very few first-time MLAs. I think in the last 3 elections in Tamil Nadu, there's not been a single independent MLA. It's almost impossible to create that much awareness for your personal image in that short a time. I had the great luxury both of the party's mandate and also of my family legacy. So in 2016, on the 6th kind of attempt or possible entry, I was announced as the MLA candidate. And I remember many people telling me that you cannot win without paying for votes. That's basically the basis of elections. I said, listen, I came back and I made some other choices and potential sacrifices in life because I wanted to practice politics the way my forefathers had done, to do it for the people. And the signal I would send by paying was that I was here to reap a return. Nobody expects that you invest the money without expecting a return. So it's not that I can or cannot afford to pay, it's that I don't want to be perceived as a politician who's here expecting to make investment and get return. And so I won't pay. A lot of things transpired. Anyway, the DMK lost the popular vote by less than 1% through a lot of unexpected developments. In 2016, I won my seat by the skin of my teeth, about 3.8% or something, like 5,000, 6,000 votes. That was an earthquake in some sense because I'd done it first-time candidate without paying money. I couldn't speak Tamil at that time, at least not on public stages. So I could only go around, visit people. And I learned something. I learned that at the end of the day, they will remember you if you meet their eyes and you have this connection. And so I went to every street. I went to as many houses as I could. And I'm naturally an extrovert, so not that difficult for me. And I actually found I was energized by those interactions. And so I won one election without speaking at all, just because I was a party's candidate. I was my father's son, I was my grandfather's grandson. I asked for a particular constituency. I asked for the Madurai Central Constituency, where I don't live, because it has the Madurai Meenakshi Amman temple that my family's been long associated with, and my ancestors built part of it. My grandfather did a renovation after the King's times for the first time. So there was personally for me, faith, and in the public perception, a continuity. And I would say the leverage of those three things together, I got elected. I vested very heavily in doing the job of an MLA. I brought in new technology. I put in a call center. I set up, when I realized that a lot of people still couldn't access the call center, I put in complaint boxes, physical complaint boxes, so that nobody would have to travel more than a few hundred meters to a box. Did the kind of layout mapping for that. Did multiple iterations of the design of the box, where located. These are simple to say, fairly complicated to execute. I started publishing 6-month reports to my constituents, delivered to their home. What have I done for you? What has worked? What hasn't worked? What is pending? How many complaints have I got? How many have been processed? In the MLA CDS, I took surveys, and with my team, we did about 150 projects. That means, about 8 or 10 crores. We probably split. Now, if you're an MLA, normally the bigger the ticket size, the better for you. If you're looking for margins or execution simplicity, then the bigger the ticket size, the sooner it gets done, and it's very easy to manage. The smaller the ticket size, 2 lakhs, 3 lakhs, 5 lakhs, bore wells here, Anganwadis there, ration shops here, bus stands there, bus stops there. These get much more complicated. So we brought in a level of execution capability probably not seen. We ran career counseling for government school students and their parents. We invested a lot in government schools, in libraries, in computerization. And at the end of 5 years, I would say I was very happy. In some surveys, one of the best 10 MLAs, in some other surveys, best MLA. So I felt like I'd done my job. And so when the 21 election rolled around, I asked for the same constituency. My leader gave it to me. And again, I refused to pay. But this time I could speak Tamil. So this time I went around and I said, if I have done a good job for you, you vote for me. Never mind who my father was. That was last time. This time I've been your MLA for 5 years. And vote for me if I've done a good job. If not, vote for somebody else. And this time people told me, if you don't pay, you won't win. Lightning never strikes twice in the same place. I actually wanted to prove that it's possible that you can repeatedly win without having to pay for votes. And so I ended up not paying. And this time I won by 34,000 or something. It was like 23, 24%, when the DMK on average won by about 8%. So I think for me, the most satisfying part of my political journey till then was being able to repeat as MLA on my terms through a performance track record and getting it done. Then came time for the ministry. As I said, I asked for the HRC ministry. My father had been HRC minister before. My grandfather had been HRE minister in the Justice Party days. My granduncle, Mr. Bhaktavachalam of the Congress, had been HRC minister, HRE minister. And my great-granduncle had been one of the people who, one of the leaders of the Justice Party, a vice president and a founder, who had pushed hard for the nationalization of the king's temples and the cultural icons so that they could be preserved. So I felt it was in my domain or legacy. And I was junior minister. I'm 26 out of 34 in the protocol, because they do it based on when you're first MLA, when you're first minister, and these kinds of things. So I thought it would be an appropriate fit. I was completely flabbergasted when my chief minister allocated me all these administrative portfolios, finance, pensions and benefits, planning, development and special initiatives. And what we call HRM, Human Resource Management, is actually what used to be called personnel and administrative reforms, which includes the recruitment, which is the Tamil Nadu Public Service Commission. It includes the training institutes. It includes the right to information agency. It includes the vigilance, the Department of Vigilance, Anti-Corruption. It includes the Lokayukta, all of that. So, it was a huge, huge responsibility, and it continues to be. But the whole point of coming to public life is that you want to improve something. You want to get better results than you used to see. Certainly in my case, when I was an opposition MLA, the performance of the government deteriorated rapidly between 2014 and 2021. I'm just talking statistically, I'm not talking about politics now. We went from being a revenue neutral state to having every year a new record revenue deficit, a new record fiscal deficit. In percentage of GSDP terms, in absolute terms, every way possible. And the system just started to decay and rot. I think the greatest lesson I take away from that is sometimes if you have 10 years of the same party, the system goes out of balance. And in this case, it was not even the same party alone. It was the same party minus the leader, because the leader was convicted in 2014. She lost 2 years of the first term, and then she lost, she passed away at the beginning of the second term. So the lesson I take away from that is that at the end of the day, if you don't have the mandate of the people, you certainly don't have the courage to facilitate or enact change. And that the living example was Tamil Nadu government from 2014 to 21. That was the consequence. That was the cause, and the decay was the consequence. But change is very hard. Right? Change is hard in the best of places. I was a change agent all my life in Lehman Brothers, in Standard Chartered, as a consultant. I started my career as a corporate and management consultant. And change is very hard because it's not in human nature to want change. Right? Most of us struggle to find a place and figure out how to optimize the environment we're in. Once we've got it all figured out, the last thing we want is to have many things change on us, and then we have to figure out some new paradigm, some new model. But in the case of corporate entities, the market forces change because the world is changing all the time. And if you don't have the capacity to keep up, you'll get left behind. But in the case of governments, it's not the case. It's not the same. There is no, once you're elected, you have 5 years. There's no real pressure. Of course, by the time next election comes around, everybody belatedly starts getting worked up about the elections. But otherwise, there's no inherent requirement to change. Maybe with the exception of these days, the way the union government tries to constrain and constrict the states, you have no choice but to actually improve, because they're bearing down so hard using all kinds of, clauses and terms that have never been used in the past, that you can't really afford to be like even 1% off your game. If you are, then you become beholden to them immediately after that. I'll get into the math in a minute. So we have this situation where we have to change if we want to get better results, but there's no natural pressure to change. And then in the organization, as I'm the HRM minister, we have a problem. We can't use any carrots and we can't use any sticks. You do really well, I can't promote you, I can't give you a bonus, I can't do anything. If you're even an IAS officer, let's forget down the ranks. And if you don't do such a good job, you're going to get promoted based on the time period anyway, right? So in practical terms, I joke with my finance secretary that we were making some estimates for the revised estimate when we were presenting the second budget, this year's budget. And he said we should peg the deficit estimate here. And I said, no, there's no way we'll hit that estimate. We'll peg it here. And he said, no, but if we peg it there, what happens if we don't hit it? I said, I worked with numbers all my career. I'm a banker, right? I know. There's no way we can exceed this number. He said, yes, and then we went a little more, and then it became clear. He said, well, if we set it here this year, then next year will have to be better than that, and the projection for next year will be better than that. We just have this ratchet effect where we're putting ourselves under the gun to deliver better and better and better. And if we set it here, then we give ourselves some leeway and we can, And at the end of the day, I had to agree to what he said, because as I told him, and I told all the finance department IAS officers were there, I said, if this was a bank, I would have told you, we'll set the number at the right number, and if we do better, I'll give you extra $1 million bonus, and if we don't, I'll say, you and I shouldn't do this job, let somebody else do the job. But here I have neither the carrot nor the stick, so whatever you say goes, we'll go with that number. Of course, we went with that number. Of course, when the final account came, it was much better not only than his number, it was better than my number by several thousand crores, right? And it's a wonderful job in some ways because I learn something every day. It's so new to anything I ever did before. I lived 20 years in the US. I lived 10 years mostly traveling around the world as a global head in a different bank. And I ran into a gentleman who was one of the key administrators of then Chief Minister of Gujarat, who's now a Prime Minister. And he was senior executive at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the BRICS Bank, if you will. And he told me, so the way we talked about it always is that if you want to affect change, you need to have political will and administrative skill, right? So that's the two components. You got to have somebody with the courage to say, I will take on change. I will take on the consequences of it, and I want to deliver results beyond where we are today. And then you must have the capacity to actually execute and deliver that. At some profound level, that's true, right? And I think the political will obviously has to come from the people. Now, there are people who will win a 50-60% majority and still worry, oh, what if the people think this way? What if I do this too fast? What happens if the consequence is wrong? And then there are people who have 35-40% mandate and say, I can do whatever I want. The people elected me. So, there's a range of interpretations of what is the will of the people. But it also requires some kind of inner strength, a core of leadership. And it requires, most of all, ambition. Right? It's very, very easy when you get into the system to get lulled by the trappings of power, to get lulled by, all the kind of bending and flags and security. And, you're still minister 5 years. I mean, in a state like Tamil Nadu, it's a $300+ billion economy. It's 80 million people. If it were a country by itself, it would be 19th or 18th largest country in the world. It would be 30th or something largest economy in the world. A minister in that is not a small thing, right? But if you let yourself get complacent, if you let yourself get kind of absorbed in that, then you'll never be able to drive change, because it's so easy to be thwarted when you try to do anything. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the way our system is, it is basically designed and structured to fail in the absence of exceptionally talented, competent, and high integrity leadership. Right? And what do I mean? I mean, the core of democracy at a very kind of economic philosophy level, the core of democracy is to ensure participation for all and reduce inequality. That's our day job. That's, economically speaking or financially speaking, our day job is to ensure everybody gets a share of the pie, everybody gets a share of the uplift, nobody gets left behind, and the social fabric is not ripped apart by increasing inequality. I gave a lecture in Mumbai, a memorial lecture about 3 or 2 months ago, where I said that the single greatest threat to the notion of democracy today is high and rising inequality all over the world, right? Now, there are also other issues. If you take places like the UK or the US, the racial makeup of the country is changing dramatically, and this is creating a lot of backlash in terms of, the traditional power people not willing to give up that role. But if you look around the world, some of the best functioning economies are those that have been, or democracies have been those that have been able to keep inequality down, or at least keep the bottom of the pyramid still engaged, still vested in the game, still vested in the system. And if we define failure as increasing inequality, then, as I say, the system is designed to fail, because every time an option is presented before us, nothing is what it seems, and everything is actually a veneer, a kind of screen. Right? Let me give you some examples. We have been having these debates about freebies, right? You remember all this stuff about the Supreme Court and all that. And I asked some profound questions. I said, on what basis, in what democratic country, is the Supreme Court the arbiter of what politicians can and cannot say about what they will and will not deliver in an election or after an election? No, I have not got an answer to that yet. And of course, the outgoing CJI, though he was kind enough to not mention me my name, he mentioned me my title, sitting on the bench and saying, don't think we don't know what your finance minister is saying in Tamil Nadu, right? But no answer came to my question. Under what part of the Constitution is the Supreme Court, or for that matter, any court, the arbiter of what a politician can and cannot promise during an election? Who appointed them? Chaperones in the relationship? No answer. But there was all these questions about this culture, that culture, Revdi culture, all this kind of stuff. Day before yesterday, a journalist sent me a tweet of the Honorable Finance Minister of India, the Union Finance Minister, where she has tweeted out the manifesto of the BJP in the Himachal Pradesh election and talked about all the things they're going to do for women, give them free this, give them subsidy that, give them reservation this, give them all the things that the Dravidian movement did 100 years ago, they're doing now, right? So I was tempted. Then I thought, no, she's very kind to me. I'll not comment on it in social media. But if I were to have commented, I would have said if imitation is the best form of flattery or the most sincere form of flattery, then surely I'm very grateful to the Union Finance Minister because she says you should do all the things we've been doing. The same way that I say that I am a great imitator of the current Prime Minister when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, when he fought for states' rights. Every single thing I say today about federalism or states' rights, he has gone further than me when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. So, a lot of politics is just posturing. A lot of politics is just noise, it's just fake, it's just arbitrary leveraging for that instance, that opportunism, right? There are like trigger words. There's a saying in US politics that social security is the third rail of politics. Third rail in the subway systems and the electric trains is where the current is carried. You touch it, you die. So there used to be a saying that social security is the third rail of American politics. In India, we have many, many, many third rails, right? Nobody asks how much, why, is it fair, is it equitable, is it truly in keeping with my ideology? All these are all random, secondary issues. They are like political myths and cliches that have been created by the entitled class to use as kind of threat words. It's almost like, every time the word comes out, immediately all debate stops. You just have to go down that path. And the lobbies are very, very, very powerful. So really, one of the profound failings of our system is that the rich, the powerful, the unduly advantaged, the usurpers of rights, of assets, have clear access to politicians, have the money to do lobbying, have unlimited resources to play the game, can influence the press, can do whatever. And the large majority that is disadvantaged does not ever get heard. The large majority who's losing out because the few are taking their unfair share, they never get heard. That is the profound problem in the way our democracy functions. And that's apart from any party politics. I'm not getting into it. And it's very few people like me who have, A, the courage of conviction that if I'm here, I'll do it the right way. If not, B, insurance. I leave this. There are other things I can do with my life. This is not the end of my career. This was not the beginning of it. And very, very few politicians have that. Maybe in 5 years, I also will be so vested in the system, 10 years, that I'll worry what happens if I lose this job. But at least till today, it's here, I do it my way. If I don't, I'll do other things with my life. Most people are not like that. Most people are not willing to test whether a decision is worth taking the risk. You may have all seen Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. And the key word that Humphrey uses to put hacker back in place says, Minister, that is a very courageous decision. Right? Anything that requires courage, every politician wants no part of, right? But in fact, I would say my learning from these 18 months on the job, and really the true learning came in my 5 years as opposition MLA. Because I got two kinds of learning. One, as a member of the House, a member of the Public Accounts Committee for 5 years, reading hundreds of pages of audit reports, seeing all the ways government could fail, seeing that there was no real consequence for failure. They had failed, the audit would say it, and then the government would do nothing. Right? And this is not unique to Tamil Nadu. All over the place it happens. But also I had this unique opportunity because I'd come from a kind of tech-heavy industry like banking, and I had some idea of the value of data and systems and infrastructure, my leader asked me to start the DMK IT wing. And I did that. And I did it in a very unique way that, I put it all out in the sunlight. I didn't want to do all of these hiddens and bots and troll armies and all that. So I went and actually recruited people village by village, town by town, district by district, to be the backbone so that the party could build a physical to data infrastructure. I must have traveled around the state 3 or 4 times, a few thousand kilometers each time. And I appointed, a few thousand office bearers after interviewing them personally. And we built an infrastructure that helped us a lot actually during COVID and during elections. We were able to make significant difference. But at the end of the day, I would say the most telling lesson that I've learned in this time. The system is extremely inefficient. It is designed to fail. If success is reducing inequality and giving everybody access, then the system is designed to fail. And everybody is vested in its failure who you can hear. They're all interested in failure. Everybody who pays a bribe, make sure they get 3x the return. Otherwise, they can't pay the bribe or 2x the return. In many cases, they get 10x or 50x because politicians don't know what they're giving away for what they're taking. If I was to say right now, what is the actual limitation in government, at least for states like Tamil Nadu, it is not money at all. We have found so many ways that money has been inefficiently spent or claimed to have been spent but actually parked in an account, or, like we went from 7 years or 8 years of record revenue deficits. Last year we brought it down despite COVID, second wave, third wave, hugely by 16,000 crores. This year I'm committed to bringing it down another 10, 20,000 crores. And I've said that after 7, 8 years of record revenue deficits, by 24, 25 we'll go to revenue neutral. That means from 62,000 crores a year in that day's money, which in 3 years will be more like 80,000 crores with inflation and size of the economy, we would have taken that back to zero. So money is not a big thing, right? And this is apart from politics. I was in a felicitation function in Delhi Tuesday night where Union Highways and Infrastructure Minister Nitin Gadkari spoke, and he said effectively the same thing. He said the markets have unlimited liquidity. I can get money. And he was kind enough and gracious enough to credit Dr. Manmohan Singh for the liberalization and for the creation of PPP models and market financing and all that. But he said, now the problem is not that. Now the problem is, can we execute? And I echo that. Across the political divide, I echo that the greatest limitation in government today is management bandwidth and administrative ability. We have huge shortfall in those things. The state of Tamil Nadu, as I said, $300+ billion economy, 38 districts, 55 departments, hundreds of boards, public sector enterprises, transport corporations, electricity, so forth. All of this managed by 34 or 35 ministers, 350 IAS officers. Simply not in the realm of proper design from any organizational kind of theory or management perspective. So, change comes. Some days we fight harder for it, some days we fight less, some days we make more progress, some days we have to take a step back, like yesterday day before I had some issues on something. Some days it's more frustrating, some days it's happier. But I don't want to end on a bad note, so I'll say a few things that are positive. I go to a lot of events where people tell me, why can't we have more educated, more professional, more skilled people like you? And that'll solve all our problems. And I always say that's a very dangerous notion. Who gets to decide what is skill, what is talent, what is professionalism? In a democracy, we value the people's voice. So I'm not sure there's a third-party arbiter of who is qualified, who's talented, who's professional. In any event, in my view of the world, as important as talent and understanding and tech skills and professional qualifications and all that are, experience is more important than that. And when I say experience of public service, experience of how the system works or doesn't. I certainly could not imagine doing the job I'm doing today if I had not had 5 years as an opposition MLA. But of course, even that, I'll give you a little joke. The current ambassador, the High Commissioner to India from Australia is a gentleman called the Honorable Barry O'Farrell. Barry O'Farrell used to be Chief Minister or Premier, as they call them there, of New South Wales. And so he came to see me, I think, after the third wave lifted. One of the first visits, he came down to Chennai and we had a long conversation. And I was extolling the virtues of having spent 5 years in opposition. I said, Barry, I couldn't do this job if I had not been in opposition. And Barry listens to me very patiently and he says, Thiaga, I was in opposition for 12 years and 1 term as Premier. As far as I'm concerned, opposition is overrated, right? So it's all relative, right? But I think experience is more important than talent. I think much more important than experience is empathy. I think if you don't have a connect with the people, if you don't have some measure of indignation when things go wrong, if you don't have some sense of what is right, then I think it's very hard to be a good public servant. And I'm saying that's an independent dimension of corruption. People can be both corrupt and empathetic. And I would say, as far as I'm concerned, at least, if I'm able to achieve anything at all, is that my ideology is very, very, very clear. Every time I unscrew my pen, every time I open my mouth, every time I have to sign a file or send it back, I say, is this really advancing what we say our intent is? Social justice, financial inclusion, fairness, opportunity for all. Is it something that actually validates that or not? And I would say we've done a few things that we're extremely proud of, introducing the breakfast scheme for school children, state school children. Not just the scheme, but the way we have done it, where in the villages, we do it through the parents of the children as a self-help group and give them money. And we have a natural check and balance. And in the cities, where we do it through IoT and automation and leveraging the startups of Tamil Nadu who help us with keeping the costs down and the quality up. Because in our free lunch program, which has been running for over 100 years in some form, about 70% of the total cost goes to the labor. And less than 30% goes to food plus energy plus room plus transport plus all that stuff. So we didn't want another version of that. We are very proud of the remedial program we call Illam Thedi Kalvi, which has just been written up and presented at the UNDP. It was a brainchild of Raghu Rajan, and I mean, not the design itself, but the focus of you must do it, you must do it, you must do it. So much so that when I was reading my response to the maiden budget, and I was speaking to the Chief Minister the night before, I said, we have to announce something on remedial education. Otherwise, why do we have such wonderful advisors like Raghu and Esther and Jean Drees and all that? And so at the end, we cooked up that program overnight. We announced it in the morning, and then we've executed in a way that actually is like a Teach for America model, using volunteers who are from that community. It's a bit complicated in the design. I don't want to go into it, but it has been such outstanding success. For like 2% of the education budget, we have improved the learning outcomes by 17%, because by God's grace, we had a baseline study in 2019. Then we had a post second wave study, and now we have a new study. So we can actually track, it's almost the best data set in the world of something like 30,000 data points of actual students, longitudinal tracking, how much they lost. Incidentally, what's earth-shattering is that they actually lost 2 years learning in 2 years of lockdown, meaning an 8-year-old was only reading and doing math at a 6-year-old level when they came back to school. And we've only been able to cover about 2/3 that gap till now. So that program is a program we'll run perpetually as long as we're in power. So, there are some victories. I would say one of the other things that's good about politicians are very good at assessing each other and assessing people. So whether it's the GST Council, whether it's individual interactions, everybody knows who's made of what stuff, who should be given what weight. And it doesn't take very long, right? I'm an unusual politician. I've only been in the role 5 or 6 years. Many politicians have been there 30, 40, 50 years. And so they have seen lots and lots of people. And the camaraderie that develops is beyond politics, right? Whether it's leftist, rightist, Hindi, Tamil, Kannada, I've been impressed. It doesn't take very long for people to assess each other, and it doesn't take very long to build friendships and relationships. And that's actually good for the country, I think, especially when we work on things like the GST Council. I would say that in closing, for me, this has been a phenomenal journey because by nature, I'm a problem solver. Something about human interaction and connecting with people invigorates me. So I find this the best job in the world. I know that I couldn't have dreamt of a better, outcome to my long and winding path. And I know that nothing is permanent, right? By good or bad luck, I was at the Twin Towers when the plane struck on 9/11. I was in the basement coming out, and I was running a few hundred employees and a couple of companies for Lehman Brothers when Lehman went bankrupt on the 15th of September. So I've seen a lot of volatility in my life. It's taught me a lot of things. But when nothing is permanent, then every day you still have hope. Even on a bad day, you lose everything. You lose what seems like everything at that day. Of course, some things are permanent. Death is permanent. But short of that, almost anything is recoverable. And you are never, a permanent winner. There's no such thing as definitive success. And you're never a permanent loser. Everything is cyclical. You take the wins, you take the losses with less happiness, but with as much or more learning. And you learn, I think, which fight to take on which day, how to bend without breaking, so you don't have to sign it one way or the other way. And I think, the great luxury for me is I'm still learning. So I think I'll do better and better at my job with every day. And I'll meet more and more interesting people, which incidentally has been fascinating. I've met politicians from around the world, diplomats from around the world. Tamil Nadu has the luxury of scale, as well as a phenomenally successful diaspora, CEOs, chairmen of big tech companies, banks. And so, sitting in the seat has been really the gift and the joy of a lifetime. So maybe I should stop there and we can take some questions, right?
So my question to you then is on prosperity, right? In a lot of your public remarks, you talk about justice and compassion in distributing prosperity and making sure everyone gets a piece of the pie, standards of living, fixing the finances of the state and so on. But from your time in the finance ministry, what industry or industries do you think can build on top of these principles to generate higher and more prosperous pie, like a larger level of increasing prosperity in a way that would make Chennai much richer in the way that finance has made Mumbai that much richer, or the way that electronics manufacturing has made Japan so much more prosperous?
I'm not sure there's any one industry, and I'm not sure I'm that worried about Chennai, actually, to tell you the truth. If I talk about reducing disparity, my chief minister has said no district left behind. I would say in Tamil Nadu still there's a rural-urban divide. It's not as bad as any other states. Let's just put this in context. The 4 large rich states of India, which are huge net taxpayers into the government of India for redistribution to other states and for running the union government. Number 1, Maharashtra. Number 2, Tamil Nadu. Number 3, Gujarat. Number 4, Karnataka. That's it, right? If you look at the disparity between states, it's humongous, right? The best to the worst is 5:1, 8:1. If you look at the disparity of tax distribution, it's humongous. Some places get back 20 paise on the rupee, some places get back 10 rupees on the rupee. If you look at education levels, if you look at birth rates, if you look at women's empowerment, you look at anything. That is bad. I would say in Tamil Nadu we're slightly better because we are the most urbanized state, something like 52% live in cities, but it's still visibly different. The birth rate in the villages is different than the birth rate in the cities. So reducing inequality is not about one industry or prosperity. I'll give you the starkest contrast. Just earlier today, I was talking to one of the big real estate tycoons. I met him for the first time. And we were talking about Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. Gujarat has been a huge economic success story. Gujarat's per capita income used to be probably 20 or 30,000 rupees behind Tamil Nadu. It's now about 8,000 rupees ahead of Tamil. Both of us are more than double the national average. So that's a different story. But per capita, it's about 8,000 rupees more than Tamil Nadu. We are like 3 lakh and they're like 3 lakh 8,000 or 295 or something. But we are completely different societies. In Gujarat, for every 1,000 people, there's one doctor. In Tamil Nadu, for every 1,000 people, there are 4 doctors. The access to healthcare is profoundly different. In Gujarat, more than 50% of the girls at the age of 18 are not in school or have not graduated school or not gone to high school. In Tamil Nadu, more than 85% have. So if your goal is to increase equity, there are many ways that you can increase prosperity, but very few ways that you can also ensure equity. So for us, of course, there are many industries, right? We think the IT industry in particular, the fintech industry, we think we are one of the biggest in auto manufacturing, as you know, a huge amount of exports go out of Chennai. It builds its own ecosystem around that. We are now going to second and third tier cities. I've committed that we'll do a lot in Madurai. The Chief Minister has given me a project about 600 crores to bring in many 10,000 jobs in the first phase and then go on from there. So that will come. You can't target that and only get that and still hope to achieve equity. What you need to do is work on the other side. You have to ensure that your average citizen has very high productivity. That means they must have very good education. That means they must have very good nutrition when they are very young. That means they should have equal access to good schooling. If you do those things, then there's a natural equilibrium in the world, right? The money goes where the opportunity is good. The banks go where the credit is good. Between Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, we have something like 40% of all the bank branches in the country. 2 states. Of course, we're about 25% or 23% of GDP. We're 40% of all bank branches. The banks go where there's money, right? The credit to deposit ratio in Tamil Nadu is between 110 and 120% depending on the quarter. That means if all the people in Tamil Nadu deposit 100 rupees, the banks have advanced 110 rupees or 120 rupees of loans. In UP, it's 50. If UP people have deposited 100 rupees, only 50 rupees is lent in UP. The rest is lent outside. So you can only create ecosystems based on one thing, on human capital. You get the human capital right, you get everybody engaged, you empower women, you give equal access. And those are very, very clear models. If you give girls access to menstrual hygiene, they will stay in school longer. If they stay in school longer, they will get married later. They will have greater likelihood of having economic, somewhat independence. If they do that, they will have less children and more healthy children. If you do that, you're now in a virtuous cycle where your weighted average productivity is increasing. You don't do that and you target today I'll get this industry, tomorrow I'll give that subsidy. These are not sustainable models across the scale that we are talking about, right? 80 million people, 100 million people, 50 million people. These are countries by size. You can't make it happen just because you have one good policy decision on one industry. You have to start from the bottom up.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us today to share your thoughts with us. I'm Tony. While I accept that, especially for a politician, where they stand depends on where they sit, I would like to know, we are in the 75th year of our independence. Are we politically and economically progressing towards from a union of states to a federation of states, especially in the light of the tussle we see between states and center, especially played through the governors? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, just factually speaking, India is probably the least federal, most centralized country in the world, certainly for any country its size, right? I've often made the comparison in China and America. In both those countries, in one extreme communist country and one extreme capitalist country, local bodies have power, right? The city of Shanghai issues its own pollution clearance permits, issues its own industrial permits, runs its own police, runs its own school board, runs its own kind of credit system, right? the provinces give banking licenses. I used to work for a large global bank. You can't get a China license. You have to get a province by province license. I lived for 20 years in the US. The county sets the liquor law. The county sets the sales tax or part of the sales tax. The city runs its own school board. The city runs its own police. The city runs its own income tax for LA, New York and all that. The state runs its own income tax. So if you look at it, we were designed to be much less federal, though the constitution says that India is a union of states. That's just an intent. In fact, they were worried whether the country would stick because there were still so many princely states. It had never been one country before. We had gone through the pain of partition. So the constitution, in fact, didn't have a concept of a third tier of government. Only in 1992, after the Panchayati Raj Act came, we even have an official third tier of government. So we are a very, very centralized country, and that was by design. Most countries, as they grow economically and in scale by population and complexity by globalization and opening and all that, tend to devolve further and further down to the local bodies. That happened certainly in 92 when the Panchayati Raj Act came. But if you look at what's happening, particularly the last 7-8 years after this regime came in Delhi, they're trying to take control of everything. I gave you an example, I said earlier, they control what you can borrow, right? I give you how such loopholes occur. So under normal circumstances, we have parallel tiers of government. That's what the Constitution says. So the Union government has its own act and laws. We have our own act and laws. Theirs is called FRBM, right? Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. We have equivalent act called FRA. If you want to violate that act, the Parliament can approve an amendment to that act and you can violate the guidelines of that act, or you can extend the deadline by which you have to comply. So can the legislature for my act. But if the Union government amends the FRBM Act, then that is the end of it. The only person they have to answer after that is the markets for the credit rating. If Tamil Nadu amends its FRA Act or Karnataka amends its equivalent act, it doesn't matter. You still get a letter from the Union government every year, in the last few years only after this regime, that says, under Article 293, subsection 3 of the Constitution, we are hereby telling you that your borrowing limit this year is 85,642 crores. Under no circumstances you can borrow more than that, right? So the question is, what does 293.3 says? It says, if you are a debtor to the Government of India, if you have borrowed from the Government of India and not yet repaid fully, then they're the equivalent of a first lien holder. They get to tell you how much more money you can borrow because then in theory their credit reliability goes down if you have too much debt. No other government ever enforced this. So they use that as a way of controlling us. Now, a state like Tamil Nadu, we were not net borrowers from the Union anyway. We didn't need to. But they still told us, we are going to come to you because when we get loans from the World Bank or Japan Industrial Investment Corporation Agency or KfW or any of these development banks, ADB or AIB, the system is set up that we can't take the loan directly. Government of Tamil Nadu cannot sign with the ADB. It signs an understanding, but the loan actually goes ADB to Union of India back to Government of Tamil Nadu. Repayments go through them. It's like a mirroring so that there's a FX control and all these things. So they say, since those loans to ADB are back to me, that is equivalent to you being a debtor to me. So you have to follow my guideline, even though we didn't take any of their money, right? So then these kinds of constraints, they keep increasing and they keep imagining that one size fits all dictated from Delhi is going to work. In fact, it's going to fail. It fails every day. Swachh Bharat and Krish Kalyan and all that, you read the CAG reports. I'm not talking about my view. You read the CAG reports, they build buildings and then there's no water. What is the use of a toilet without water? Right? They send money for whitewashing schools. The school is a thatch school. How will you whitewash the thatch? So there's all these limitations. And there is no answer other than devolution. I can play you on my phone multiple clips of former Chief Minister of Gujarat making exactly these or more statements. So there is only one answer. It's not based on where you stand or where you sit. You have to devolve more. Otherwise, there's no way you can succeed. Simply cannot.
Hi, sir. Good evening. I'm Sunita. Very kindly, I got to skip the queue with a long line of men. But I just wanted to say, may there be many more politicians as courageous and as much integrity and empathy as you. But I wanted to know, in your personal opinion, where the 2024 elections are heading, and is there any hope?
Yeah, you mean if I don't get fired, then you hope there's more like me, right? You don't want more people to come like me. No. I mean, listen, who am I to speculate? I only echo what many people have said before, that a week is a lifetime in politics, right? Trying to predict outcomes 2 years out, 1 year out, and all is a mug's game. I'll give you concrete examples. I thought I had very good data and systems and all that. And when the MP elections were run in Tamil Nadu in 2019, remember we had lost 2016 by 1%. We had lost 2014 where we had 0 MPs. All 40 were ADMK MPs, the 39 plus Puducherry. So when 2019 came, we did all the analysis. And I came back and told my chief minister, I said, my best guess best estimate is that we will win this election by 8% popular vote margin. If we win it by 8% popular vote margin, considering that a 1% margin led to a 60-40 split in the seats, 8% margin is equal to like 80-20 or 90-10 or something in actual seat numbers. First past the post, right? So I said we'll win 32, 33, something like that, MP seats. If we do not get to 8% margin, there's only prediction. I didn't talk about individual seats. If we do not get to 8% margin at a macro level, it means that the BJP and ADMK have been able to twist this election, which should have been about their performance, their future likelihood of making a difference, into some referendum on our character rather than our performance, because we haven't been in state government for 5 years, or 7 years, 8 years by then, and not in the union for 5 years. So, it cannot be about DMK will not perform, because we hadn't been around to be evaluated on performance. So I said, if we don't get an 8% margin, it's because they have turned the debate into the character of the DMK and somehow been able to put propaganda against us. In the event, we won by some 23%, right? I was off by a lot. I was off. But when I analyzed the numbers, within 36 hours or something, I went back and I told the CM, I said, Anna, if we had won by less than 8, I told you this election would have been about us and not about them. At 23%, I'm telling you, the election was only about them, not about us. We just happened to be the only alternative. They just wanted them gone, right? That's basically why we won all the seats. So I'm saying the best case scenario is we can't tell. I'll give you one further statistic. In my constituency, roughly 1.5 lakh people vote every time. Okay? But if I go down and analyze which 1.5 lakh people, they're not the same. Between the 2019 election and the 2021 election, 30,000 different voters showed up. 30,000 who showed up last time didn't show up. And 30,000 who were not there last time showed up this time. Some of those you can explain by death, moving away, coming of age and all that. But more than half is people who were there last time, didn't come to vote and came and voted this time. And people who voted last time and were not axed enough to come and vote this time. So this is just completely a mug's game, trying to predict the elections and all that. Anybody who tells you otherwise is just either over-talking their book, they don't know what they're talking about, or they have a vested interest, they have an agenda. They try to make it look like X is going to happen or Y is going to happen, right? It's simply impossible to predict what's going to happen. I had this debate with Rajdeep Sardesai in public where he said something about Modi remains the leader to beat something. He went on some poll. And I wrote and I said, Rajdeep, it may surprise you this late in your career that we don't actually run an election for a national leader. We elect MPs. And whoever gets most MPs gets to decide, who's the prime minister. So let's talk about MP by MP constituency. In my view, if you are anybody other than the BJP, that's the game you should play. Even the BJP, if they were smart, wouldn't put all the eggs in one basket. But, they have descended to some other level now. So I won't get into that. But I think if we are smart, we play every MP seat as every MP seat, right? We had no shot at forming the government. We won 39 of 39 seats or 39 of 40 seats. The people just have a clear view. We are able to communicate better, that's all. Yeah.
Good evening. It's great to listen to a minister who speaks facts. Sir, in your professional opinion, how do you think demonetization could have been done better to the greater extent, if there was a greater extent?
I said this within like 2 months of demonetization. I'll say it again. It was myself and my personal friend, though political, very different ideology, Mr. Gurumurthy. He and I were in a seminar. It was January or February after demonetization. And he wanted to speak last, right? But he was a moderator, so he got to speak first and last. So he got to speak first, and he said, everybody talks about all the things that went wrong, and they say, this, and they say, he says, it's ridiculous. If anybody had a better design, they should tell the better design first. Only then it makes any sense. So then I got to speak. I said, I'll tell you. What were your ambitions again? Remove fakes and counterfeits and terrorist financing, remove black money, and increase the digital volume. And there's a bunch. I said, if I was going to do this, I would announce 2 years ahead of time I'm going to do it. Then I'd ask for a competition invitation of designs. I would start getting everybody involved. I'd try to make it as imitation proof as possible. I would start ordering point-of-sale terminals and ATM machines. I would start education processes in villages. I would incentivize the banks to go, get people online with traveling ATMs. All this. I would do 2 years lead up of education, design, printing, manufacturing of the boxes for the ATMs to take the new notes, etc. And then one day I would effect it, and then I would say the window for conversion is 6 months or 8 months after that. I would achieve reduction and elimination of fakes and counterfeits, or much more than it is now. I would achieve great shift towards digital, and maybe I will or will not catch any black money. But what I would do before I announce this is I would call all the banks and start reporting into a database every transaction more than 10,000 rupees into my database. And then when I announced it, I would say, incidentally, I'm capturing data. And I may come back to you 2 years, 5 years from now. Right? So I said, that's a way that I would achieve the objectives. Maybe I would not have achieved any black money reduction or not. But the question I want to ask you is, how much black money reduction did this demonetization achieve? Because that time they hadn't published the numbers. Now we know that 100% of the money came back. So zero black money reduction was done. He gets up and he says, Mr. Thiaga Rajan is an idealist. He's a very educated man. But do you know what would happen if I announced 2 years ahead of time? Everybody would do this, that. I mean, everything was done anyway in 3 months. What black money was caught that would have been not caught if you had taken the smart, long-term, empathetic, the thoughtful route. So there were 100 ways it could have done better. I asked 2 profound questions. In the history of the world, how many times has anybody demonetized 86% of the currency without having the new notes printed? Not without having the new notes printed, without having a line of sight into when there would be enough new notes, because they had not even got enough ink or paper or printing capacity to print new notes. And this genius idea that somehow, because you can print 2000s, when the next note is 500, the ratio of notes should be no more than 2:1, right? Because they have to be fungible. I go and spend something, I got to get something back. If you give me 2000 and the next note is 500, how is this fungible? So effectively 2000 is not in circulation now. They're just being hoarded by black money, hoarders, right? And they stopped printing 2000 because too many of them went and nothing comes back in circulation. So it's hard for me to imagine a more profound disaster than that, right? Self-inflicted disaster. There were 1,000 ways it could have been done better. Not 1, 1,000 ways.
So good evening. My name is Dr. Karan. It's first of all an honor to be here because I'm a third generation DMK member as well. And you spoke really well. You're so educated with this. Recently, our honorable leader, Mr. M.K. Stalin, had stated that for 2030, we have a $1 trillion vision for Tamil Nadu. What specific financial initiatives is your government going to take to ensure this? Because some would call this far-fetched, but I'm sure you all must have a robust plan in place. So,
yeah, I mean, again, I got to stay within my brief. I only run the finances of the government. There's a minister called Industries, Commerce and Investments or something who does that. But I've just said the macro level. For us to go from where we are today to 1 trillion, and always these dollar goals are a bit dicey, right? Because it's affected by foreign exchange rates, which is affected by relative inflation levels. So a bit complex. But assuming that the FX moves in the way the forward market suggests it will, that means we got to have something like a 14 to 15% CAGR in nominal terms, meaning inflation plus real growth together to get 15%. I don't think there's any way we get less than 5 or 6% inflation for the foreseeable future. That means we got to get a real growth rate somewhere between 8.5% and 10%, maybe 10.5%. Tamil Nadu has already done that before. Between 2006 and 2011, we had a 10.15% CAGR, 5 years, including the global financial crisis. So it's not like it's not doable. We can easily do that. The real question here is, if we are going to do it, what sectors, at what times, and what kind of trajectory of the curve? I would say right now the winds are at our back because everybody's transferring out of China, diversifying out of China. And India is an obvious destination. And within India, Tamil Nadu is an unfair share of the attention and the market and the investments. I mean, unfair meaning we're 6% of the population, we're like 10, 12% of the economy, we're probably 14, 15% of the investments coming in, or maybe slightly more. So those things are going well for us. We have already engaged through a public tender advisors to help us come up with a more concrete plan, just like Ms. Jayalalitha had a Vision 2023 plan, which was done by ADB and IMF and all that. We want more commercial people to help us with that. The real question, though, is this assumes that we don't have a global recession in the next 6-7 years, right? Or there's some default assumption in there, or at least not one so bad that it takes our growth negative. And just to put that in context, even in the 2021 year, when the Indian economy shrunk by 7 or 8%, Tamil Nadu's economy grew by 1.6%. Right? That's what you'd expect. We're more resilient. But what I can do as a finance minister, which I've stated publicly in the assembly and in other places, is ensure that we have enough buffers of liquidity, borrowing capacity, liquidatable assets in place that should a recession hit us, that we can cushion the bottom of the pyramid and keep the demand from plummeting, because we are a demand-driven state also. Because our Gini coefficient is much lower than Gujarat or Maharashtra, personal consumption is quite a high proportion of our economy. So we need to, of course, for humanitarian reasons, but also for economic reasons, we need to keep the stimulus at the bottom and keep demand boosted should we go into recession. So what's within my ambit, we have run the tender, and that's through an agency which is under the finance department called TNIDB, Industrial Development Board, to have a more concrete path to get from here to there. The macro level, based on history and based on the current circumstances, is not very, very hard. It's not easy, but it's not that hard. We grew by, I think, 13.5%, 14% last year, despite second wave, third wave. We're projected to grow another 14.5% this year. So we're on track. But if a recession hits, then all bets are off. Right?
Good evening, Mr. Thiaga Rajan. This is Sensei Raj from Vision India 2032. First of all, a warm welcome, although it's a bit late. I think it's a sleeping crowd. We could put our hands together to Mr. Thiaga Rajan. Coming from a background of banking, especially with Lehman Brothers, it's clearly evident that the numbers speak. And in your actions and numbers, you're not a local player. You're not a Tamil Nadu player. Because I sat there hearing and answering the questions, and you're more about the nation, about building the federation of states rather than looking at a local level. I think your blueprint for the remedial education, I would like to sit with you and take a few notes on. My question to you is this. You spoke about 7 different aspects until now that I could cognizantly bear, and how we could use this in nation building. I mean, we talk about being the second global superpower in about next 10, 12 years. But if you ask me or the common Joe or Jane on the street, they would laugh at this, because the military might itself will not take us there unless we have the socioeconomic empowerment to be activated at any given point of time. I think few of your works that you have taken up speaks volumes about it. Now, how could we take this from the choking grips? I'm saying this very sensitively. The 3 organizations that you mentioned, that is the IMF, the World Bank, and the ADB. ADB, let's take that at the last. But these 2, the bandicoots, I have mentioned the United Nations, that if you keep them away from countries, the countries would start flourishing.
Yeah,
But again, let me not give you time to have a report on that. My question to you is this. How could we cross the borders across our cultural and, of course, economic and political will to administratively bring our supreme capability in human capital to take a country to the next generation superpower in reality? Thank you.
Look, this is the hardest job I've done. It's beyond any ambition I ever had. I wanted to do public service. I never dreamt that I would be finance minister. My father spent, I think, 40 years in public life, and he got to be speaker once and minister for a week before he passed away. He was 10 times as great a man as I'll ever be in my life, but that was as a human being. In political terms, he was not particularly successful. So I had no ambition that I would get to this level. I say that because this is the highest that I ever aspire to. I don't have any ambition beyond this. I don't want any job anywhere else. And certainly every time somebody tells me about union minister and all that, I say, no, I'm very happy where I am. There's not enough tea in China to take me to the union. I got a day job, I'm happy. But to me, it's always about the people, right? And I've had this discussion multiple times. In fact, my current friend, Mr. N.K. Singh, Finance Commission Chairman, when I was with him on Tuesday night when we did the Dr. Manmohan Singh tribute. In the DMK's written submission to the 15th Finance Commission, it's in there. I say for 25 years, you have been taking more and more money from the well-off states and giving it to the less well-off states. In any other part of the world, that's true. In every federal system, the well-off net transfer to the less well-off. But in China, when the money goes from the coast to the hinterland, in Europe, when it goes from the prosperous Western Europeans to the Southern Europeans, in the US, when it goes from New York and California and Minnesota to Missouri and Kansas and Alabama, you find that the gap converges. You take any statistic, per capita income, quality of education, quality of infrastructure, quality of healthcare, the gap converges. In India, for 25 years, you've kept on moving the needle. At one point, we used to be 7.5% of the economy, 7.5% of the GDP, 7.5% of the population, 7.5% of the GDP, and get 7.5% of the taxes. Now we're 6% of the population, 11% of the GDP, and get 4% of the taxes, right? And in India, if you look across, as the transfers have kept on increasing, the gap has not narrowed, has not stabilized, has not stayed wide, has not widened, it has accelerated in the widening. Something is structurally wrong. No amount of money is going to fix these problems. There's something wrong. You're incentivizing the wrong things by giving just based on population and poverty and all that. And in that note I wrote, you must incentivize what percentage of girls under 15 are in school. You must incentivize what property rights women have. You must incentivize what access to jobs and entrepreneurship they have. Because if half the population is excluded from development, there's no way you can develop. How much money you give them, there's no way you can develop. So you incentivize that and say, every time you increase the percentage of girls that are in education, we'll give you more money. That way you'll start converging the gap, right? So unless you do something basic right, we have been doing that right for 100 years. The first place to give women the right to vote was Madras Presidency in the Indian subcontinent. The first place to legislate compulsory elementary education for boys and girls was Justice Party government, 1921. 100 years later, we are getting the benefit. That includes parts of Karnataka, that was then Madras Presidency, right? You still don't have that legislation in UP. Not in effect. You still have 50% or so out of school. How can you fix the state unless you fix those things? So there are structural limitations to success. If you don't remove those limitations, the rest of it is all just noise. It's just like a marginal trade, right? You have to do the profound things right.
Vanakkam, sir. My name is Anbarasu. Actually, I don't want to put a question on you. I just have a doubt in my mind which was existing from childhood. See, any individual who is studying very well and putting a very hard work in during his childhood, during the adult stage, and he is getting job and he is earning some money, some as a salary or whatever the business, whatever he's doing. After entire his lifetime, if you see, so he has to take the one house, one car, maybe in the normal car, not in the luxury, and he has to wait for the retirement benefits. This is the general human beings what Indians are doing it. But if you see the other hand, if any politicians, irrespective of the party belongs, once they come to the power from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, if you see, all the politicians are becoming rich and richest. How it is possible? From where these monies are flowing to them is not only for their period. Their next 2-3 generations, they are flowing with the money only. How it is?
I don't know. My family has continued to get poorer relative to the assets we had in the last 100 years, 120 years, 150 years. I declared, 30 or 40 crores of assets, somewhere in that number, when I was a MLA candidate the first time. I was very disappointed that 5 years later my assets only dropped by 3% or 5%, but that's because the guideline values of my land and all rose. So I can only speak for myself. My assets are transparent. Most politicians may have other assets. I mean, who am I to comment on others? Right? Each person their own. Yeah.
Hi, sir. I'm Siddharth. It was nice to hear you talk. My question has to do with liquor tax. The way I see addiction work is that even if you end up imposing a sin tax on top of it, it won't actually stop people from, gathering whatever they have to try and, purchase liquor. So is sin tax actually pushing people towards poverty in that manner? And should governments actually depend on their income so much?
Let me start from the easy to the hard, right? The government of Tamil Nadu does not depend on liquor revenues as some would allege. I'm on record in the assembly and in public forum, which I'll say here, that yes, we get some 30,000 crores in revenue between excise and our share and sales, VAT and all that stuff. My best guess is it costs us a lot more than that in absenteeism, in alcoholism, in domestic abuse, in health treatment, in all of that. The thing is, this revenue comes in one stream and those costs are hidden. I don't know what they are. So I guarantee you that there is no, automatic financial benefit trade in this. That's the easy part. And I've said it on record. I've said we need to reform it. There's many other issues. But the more complex question you ask is whether sin taxes are effective and whether they are morally justifiable, I would say, if I break your question into two parts. I would say those are two sides of the same coin in the sense, of course, there's some deterrence effect because we are not the only place in the world that does it, right? The US does it, Europe does it, Singapore does it. Everybody imposes sin taxes. And it's supposed to work that way, right? In the sense that it will deter some percentage of the people because they can't afford it. And for the other people, because they're indulging in activity that is detrimental to the greater good, that the state should benefit from it, right? So, I mean, all over the world they do it. Whether sin taxes actually drive people to poverty, I'm not so sure. I mean, are you saying there are negative outcomes in Tamil Nadu or in Karnataka? Absolutely. I'm not sure that if the taxes were lowered, those would go away. Maybe they just drink more, right? So, I mean, for the same amount of money, you know what I'm saying? So, and we have profound problems. We got problems much more than that. In Tamil Nadu, the volume of liquor sales has only gone up about 100% in 10 or 12 years because there's massive leakage and corruption in that. If you look at Delhi, it's gone up like 350%. You look at Karnataka, Kerala, it's gone up like 250, 300%. So, it's a complex subject. It's rife with corruption. One could argue that the current monopoly model we have now is only benefiting the few at the expense of the many. Certainly, almost all the expatriate and global investors and foreign companies that come to us want us to remove the restriction, want us to have a pub culture like Bangalore in Chennai as a way of competing with Bangalore. So I know, and again, I'm on record. But syntax is a complex thing. That's what you expect. You expect that some of it will be deterrent, and you expect that those who can afford to pay should pay. Right? You have to raise the revenue somehow. And there's a moral imperative, right? You want to discourage people drinking more or smoking more. Because the state bears the health cost at the end of the day. If they don't get it anywhere else, we're all running public health systems. Right? So
I'm Ramesh Shastri. The question which I was asked, which I'm going to ask you, I'd asked a person from the judiciary who answered that question, and now you're from the executive. So I'm curious to get the answer from you. Also, I was pleasantly surprised that you said there's a lot of camaraderie and bonhomie among politicians across the board, across the states. My question is, in 2026, I think the freeze, if I'm right, on the representative from the states in the parliament will shift to the population. That shall mean more North Indians will get into the parliament than South India. Given the economic, the cultural, and the linguistic differences, what effect could this be on the nation? Your take on it. I had the judiciary's take, the executive's take on it.
well, first let me clarify. When I say camaraderie, I'm not saying across all politicians of all parties. I'm saying we can assess who's who. So I won't have the same level of camaraderie with all people of a party, any party, not my own, not anybody else's. Right? But it's a very, very difficult question, right? On the one hand, you say, is it truly representative democracy if every 1.25 million people in Tamil Nadu, 1.5 million people in Tamil Nadu have an MP, whereas every 2 million people in UP have an MP? On the other hand, the basis for the 1976 42nd Amendment and the 2001 84th Amendment of why they froze the seats was to say it was in the national interest to ask people to control population. How can we penalize those who have controlled the population? There are also examples around the world of places where they've frozen the seats in other countries permanently because of this disparity that you don't want to encourage high population growth places and high demand places compared to high production places. Yeah, it's hard for me to say what is a neutral outcome. I think it will be a life-changing event for the notion of India, were we to go to actual redistricting and actual, new seats. But again, I don't want to be a pessimist. I don't want to be, I'm not qualified to be a crystal ball gazer. I would say there'll be a huge disparity in the level of representation, in the level of taxation, and in the level of benefits. Two of those three already exist now. You'll get the third one if that happens. I think what would help a lot to diffusing that kind of problem is to devolve power to the extent of the United States or China. Move power not just to the states but to the local bodies. Therefore, the union government is largely in the business of, international trade, foreign relations, defense, currency management, those kinds of things that are not, day-to-day activities of the people, like education or health or, redistribution. If that happens, whatever the outcome, that is mitigated. But that's like, it's like a global optimum. That devolution is good no matter what scenario happens in 26. But otherwise, it's going to be a very, very, fundamental change in the nature of our democracy. What way that will go, it's hard for me to say.
Good evening, Mr. Thiaga Rajan. My name is Muralidhar Rao. I follow you on Twitter, so I understand you very well. You said, you talked about empathy, you talked about the courage of conviction. You are a good communicator. But then you said, you said about not being sure about the future and things like that. With all of these, I'm sure you will remain and continue to win. And my question is, if you, by any chance, lose anywhere, will you give up your, will you continue to fight? Will you not continue to fight? And you also mentioned about you don't have an ambition. Come on, sir. We see you as Prime Minister material. Please don't disappoint us. Yes. So you have it all. I think we, I will say you deserve us, we deserve you.
So that kind of ambition is the kiss of death in politics. let me disavow that right now. No, I genuinely mean it in the sense that, of course, I want my life to have meaning. Of course, I've enjoyed the benefit of so many privileges, so many good opportunities, so many good outcomes. But I'm not sure that I have either the capability or the desire to do much more than I'm doing now. In the sense, it's a complex enough job. It's a very hard job. If my chief minister didn't exist, and if he didn't protect me every day, and you must read into my words, if he didn't protect me every day, I'm not sure I could do the job I'm doing now, right? So these are very, very, on the surface, it may look like, and everybody gets into politics with the same ambition. But in fact, that's not true. And in fact, if I might even say that to trade off personal ambition for greater outcomes is fairly common, right? Like it's not, if it's about you, sometimes it's not about the outcome. And that's kind of an inherent flaw in the democratic model. They used to say in the US, if somebody wants to be president bad enough, it must be for a wrong reason. And he shouldn't be president, right? So I think, I'm, as I say, I'm almost as accidentally in the seat as Che Guevara became finance minister. And so this itself is for the foreseeable future, this is a great outcome for me. I did say one thing that I'm having a rethink about. When I came to politics, I told my wife incidentally is American, never lived outside the US till we moved here, and we have 2 boys. And I said, I'll go in at 50, I'll get out at 60. I said, if I don't do this, I'll feel unfulfilled and I'll feel like I've let my forefathers down. So there's an upside, I go and get the baggage out of my head, I pay my debts to my forefathers. I happen to be a believer and I have this concept of punyam and good deeds and all that. I said, I build some credit for my children. And then, I have enough money in the bank that 10 years I can afford to be honest. And we can, without reducing your lifestyle by $1 a year. And so after 10 years, then I'll do other things, and I'm sure I'll make back the income I lost or other things in the period. But I would now say that I never dreamt that I would get this kind of opportunity to make a difference in those 10 years, especially 5 years gone in opposition. And so, now I haven't yet, but I might go and ask my wife for an extension at the end of 10 years to stay a bit longer. But that's about the extent of any change in my view of the world. Thank you. Thank you very much.